For more in-depth perspectives and interesting stories, sign up for our daily newsletter at tvo.org/daily.
77 candidates in this federal election identify as either First Nation, Inuit, or Métis. That's a record. Let's find out what prompted 3 of them to answer their party's call. And as is our custom, we'll introduce our guests from furthest away to closest to our studio, starting in Kemptville, Ontario, with Lorraine Reckmans. She is running for the Green Party in Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes, and it's her 6th time on the ballot. In London, Ontario, Jason Henry, who's running for the NDP in Lambton, Kent, Middlesex. He is chief of the Chippewas of Kettle and Stony Point First Nation, although he has taken a leave from those duties during this campaign. And in Orillia, Ontario, Cynthia Wesley Eskimo. She is a Liberal Party candidate in Simcoe North. She's also the chair for Truth and Reconciliation at Lakehead University. And as I welcome you 3 to the program tonight, let me also add that we did reach out to the Conservative Party of Canada for one of their candidates. They didn't get back to us. That is, if I may say, standard procedure for the Conservative Party. They don't respond to media inquiries, and that's their right not to do so, but that's why we don't have a Tory on the show tonight. All right, Lorraine, let's start with you because this is your 6th time running. How come you keep doing it?
Well, I think what drives me really is climate change and the fact that we have to take action on climate change. But what engaged me was actually the fact that Indigenous people were being excluded from resource development decisions that impacted traditional lands.
Do you feel you are able to have an impact by running but not winning?
I do think I'm having an impact. I mean, as the years go by, we see Canadians generally wanting to discuss Indigenous rights issues at the doorstep.
I find that an interesting answer because we do have to remember that probably upwards of 80% of the people who will run in this federal election won't win. But they're running anyway because they think they've got something to say. So, okay, hats off to you for doing so. Jason, how about to you? You are... Apparently, I'm told you weren't going to run, and then something happened that changed your mind. What happened that changed your mind?
Well, I've been considering running for a number of years because I have the ability and the voice to be able to create positive change for Indigenous people. On July 1st, I was making my way to London, Ontario for the Turtle Island Healing Walk. And I began seeing signs in the country that said, "Hate has no home here," and "Our London family." And I began to get worried that I would attend this event like I've attended many others, and I'd see the same 100 faces at the event. And I arrived at Victoria Park, and there was a crowd of people wearing orange shirts, and I felt good. It was more than 100 people, and I socialized with people that were close to me, in my family, and eventually it was time to give my opening remarks, and I was called to the stage, and I passed a reporter, and he said to me, "We have more people here than BLM and Our London family. That means we have more than probably 10,000 people." And that sounded like amazing. I got on the stage. All I could see was this huge sea of orange. And then we walked down Richmond Row, and we got to the corner of Richmond and Oxford. And a very good friend of mine, Raymond Delary, said to me, "Hey, bro, look back. Take a picture of that sea of orange, send it to Jagmeet Singh, and tell him you're in, because that is evidence that people are ready to change and they're supporting us."
And do you feel vindicated in your decision? You think it was still the right thing to do?
I absolutely do. I've had great responses. Last night I was at an engagement, and following the engagement, one of the organizers let me know that sometime during the night, somebody said, "I'm not going to vote for the drunken Indian guy." And that tells me that I've made the right choice, because I'm not a drunken Indian guy. I'm an Indigenous leader. I am a father. I am a husband. I am a son. And I am going to promote change and create change in this country. And those old racial slurs, those antiquated thoughts about Indigenous people will be eradicated in this country. Whether I'm elected or not, I will promote change and create change.
Cynthia, this is not your first run either. How many times is this for you, putting your name on a ballot?
This is the 3rd time. But I've been at this game. I mean, I've been trying to change the face of Indigenous Canada for the last 40 years. And frankly, as both of the candidates have already said, it's working. People are very interested in actually what's going on. The unmarked graves raised a huge amount of compassion and sympathy across Canada for what has happened. It made it evidence-based, I suppose. But I've been very interested in actually taking our voices to the table. I think that, as somebody already mentioned, we have not necessarily been included in conversations around environment, and we need to be. And I think we need to be included in conversations around what kinds of things the Liberal Party has put forward on their platform for Indigenous people. It's not enough to say we're going to do this. We need to be there to ensure that it gets done. So there's a lot of reasons why I think I'm running. And of course, the Liberal Party itself, it aligns with my values. I mean, I respect the Green Party and I respect the NDP as well for what they have to say. The Conservative Party, not so much, but I'm running because I think it's an important thing for us to do. And also Indigenous women need to be standing at that table and ensuring that their voices are heard as well.
Now, for whatever reason, you have decided, I think all three times, to run as a Liberal in some of the safest Conservative ridings in this country. How come?
Well, I happen to be living in those safe ridings. And in this riding in particular, in Simcoe North, we have two very big and progressive First Nation communities. The Beausoleil First Nation in close to Midland, and of course here close to Aurelia is the Rama First Nation. And both of those communities are absolutely moving forward. We're not waiting for the government to save us. I mean, that's a long wait, as we all know by now. But they're actually moving forward very, very aggressively and very confidently into the future. And I'm going to help them. I'm going to ensure that they get there. But the rest of the riding is also having issues around housing, affordability, and accessibility. But I'm learning very clearly that we have people in these ridings that are doing an incredible work, not only about sustainability, but regenerative work. And I think that's where we all need to go. It's important.
I do want to ask all three of you about something that is a little delicate, and that is, you know that there are Indigenous people in this country who think it is wrong for Indigenous people to run in so-called colonial settler parliamentary elections, that in some respects you are participating in a political process that has oppressed Indigenous people in this country for hundreds of years. So I want to ask Lorraine whether you've run into any brushback or pushback during the times that you have run because of your willingness to participate in this parliamentary process.
Well, Steve, I have to tell you that just this past week, I received a letter from National Chief Roseanne Archibald, and I was really pleased to see it. You know, it was a real shot in the arm to me as an Indigenous woman candidate, with an understanding that we have to inform public policy in this country. If our voices aren't there, our issues are not going to be addressed. And so there's a lot of well-meaning, remarks, well-meaning statements that people have made about Indigenous issues, but I think they're missing the mark on what are the foundational things that we have to deal with. So it's necessary that we're there. If we're not there, I mean, policy will be made about us, without us. And Greens support free, prior, informed consent. It's a principle, to engage and to base relationships on. I mean, the thing that's troubled me is going back to my experience in the National Aboriginal Forestry Association, advocating for Indigenous rights in forest policy. It became evident to me that the decisions weren't made based on questions of sustainability or fairness or equity. The questions and the answers were being based on political positions on issues. So it was evident to me that in order to affect change, we had to get political.
Jason Henry, how about to you? Any awkwardness about participating in a colonial settler parliamentary process?
I'm already a federally elected official. I'm an Indian Act chief. I ran in a federal election. I was elected as a member of council and chief. I've already entered the system. And as an Indigenous person, I have a federally issued card that tells me what rights I have, supposedly. And without changing that, because currently we are within that system. There's no true nation-to-nation relationship right now. And having many critics myself, being an elected official, I know that being a critic on the outside, throwing stones, so to speak, in, doesn't do any good. We have to actually, engage in the system and affect change. I have a very solid base in my culture, my identity, my spirituality. I'm a member of the Loon clan from the Anishinaabe Nation. And I know that through that, that gives me the ability and the responsibility to do this work. And some of us have to do that. We don't have the option to sit back, because if we don't embrace the changes now, we're leaving that for our children to suffer the same way we did.
Cynthia, any brushback that you've received along the way for running?
Oh yeah, yes, I have had many conversations over the course of time. I'm too busy for that. I've got lots of things that I have to do. I do a lot of public education. I'm trying to get people to understand across Canada that we have things that need to be done and that we can do. We can collaborate on these things. We can get this stuff done if we're working together. Running for the Liberal Party, I don't see that as a wrong thing to do. We live in Canada. We have to have a relationship with the federal government and the provincial government and the First Nation governments and everybody else. And I'm all for working together. I mean, the Maori have had seats in the New Zealand government since the 1800s. I think we're running a little bit behind when it comes to that, because we could certainly put some designated seats there, and I think it would actually start to more modernize and normalize the process. But I think we have to have our voices there. We stood back for far too long, and in 2015, we convinced a lot of Indigenous people that they needed to vote, and they did. So I still remember little old ladies lining up to be able to get in the door to make sure they cast their vote. So I think we've changed the picture of who should participate and who should not. And I believe that if we want to have our voices heard, we better stand up and make sure that we speak loud enough for them to be heard by everybody across the country.
Now, that's an interesting idea, and I haven't seen it in any of the major party platforms. The notion, Jason, of having designated seats in the Parliament of Canada for Indigenous representation. What do you think of that idea?
I've thought of it for a long time, and it's interesting because will that affect the change? Will that be the answer? I mean, it's important. It's important for us to have that voice and have it continually entrenched in Canada. But also, is that the right thing to do? Because what I've considered actually is having an Indigenous riding, right? Rather than having our population split up by the area we live in geographically, but actually having an Indigenous set-aside seats based on Indigenous people across Canada. We have to have the election still, but it'd be, say, like the 6 or 8 First Nations in my area, or the 6 or 8 First Nations in Northern Ontario, and break it up that way. I think it's a very good idea, and I think it's very important.
Okay, let's look at that idea may not be in the platforms, but we do have some ideas here that are in the platforms, and I'm going to take a moment just to go through some of the bullet points here. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but it's a few of the ideas. A look at a few pieces of reconciliation in the major party platforms. The Conservative Party, for example, would purport to spend $5 billion to invest in resource development as a means of enhancing reconciliation. The Liberal Party would commit an additional $1.4 billion for a mental health and wellness strategy and invest a further $2 billion in Indigenous housing. The New Democrats would like to implement a co-developed, fully funded Indigenous national housing strategy. And by the way, we should mention the NDP is the only party to use the word genocide in its platform. And the Green Party would end all the drinking water and boil water advisories, of which there are still 52 in effect in 33 communities. And as another aside, the Greens and the NDP promise to respect Indigenous sovereignty, but unlike the Liberal and Tory documents, there's no mention of Indigenous sovereignty there. So, let's go through this. Lorraine, why do you think the Greens have the best platform on offer?
Well, I would like to say that their policy is informed. So a lot of the policy motions that were developed for the Green Party of Canada are based in the Royal Commission on Aboriginal People recommendations from 1996 that talk about foundational change. Things like repudiating the doctrine of discovery, things like repealing the Indian Act, rebuilding in making the investment to rebuild in nations. And that goes back to the question you asked earlier about making seats available inside Parliament for Indigenous people. I mean, the question is, when are we going to get to the foundational work of reconstituting nations so that they can negotiate on an equitable, from an equitable position? So you add to RCAP recommendations, which RCAP gave us a 20-year plan forward in 1996 to reconcile with Canada. It talked about a new royal proclamation, talked about a new relationship recognizing the nationhood status of Indigenous peoples, and then we bring in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. So the Green Platform is the policy is based on a lot of work that Canada has already done to move us forward. And I think the Greens are more bold and progressive in saying things like it's time to work, on a basis of free, prior, and informed consent with First Nations to repeal the Indian Act and get out from under that oppressive, sexist, racist policy.
Cynthia, let me get you to speak to one of the criticisms we hear about both the leader of your party and about the party itself, and that is lots of talk, not necessarily lots of action. You want to speak to that?
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's not something that I would absolutely not agree with. I think that the Liberal Party and Justin Trudeau has made some huge strides forward. This is a government that has said yes. This is the first government that, in my recollection, and I'm well over 60 now, that has said yes, that has taken a whole of government approach, that has put in every single mandate letter of every single ministry that they must deal with these issues. They're about 86% addressing the 94 calls to action. They're either done or they're in progress. They've got the water boil advisories lifted. They've got something like 68% of them. So they're actually making, and that's in 6 years. So they're actually doing what they said. They did the missing and murdered Indigenous women inquiry. They have the 236 recommendations that are moving forward, and they put resources into that. They have done an incredible amount of work. I think the problem is, and I say this all the time, is we don't get it into the public domain very quickly. And I know that a lot of the negotiations that are going on across the table, where jurisdiction and authority is being addressed, are not in the public domain until they're resolved. So you don't put negotiations as they're moving forward out there. So I think a lot of people don't realize that the Minister of Crown Relations has done an incredible job of actually lifting a lot of those conversations. Child welfare is being addressed, the standards being accommodated, the way it's funded being changed. So there's a lot going on that I guess just doesn't get really out there. And I think it's been one of my sort of over the side complaints about it all, is like, you're doing all this great work. Why don't you let people know about it so that they can understand that we are actually moving forward very quickly? So all of those things, United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, that got royal assent under this government. There's a lot going on, I think, that we need to be proud of. And reconciliation, that's my gig. I mean, I'm the chair for the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation at the University of Manitoba. I'm pushing this all the time. I know what's going on. We have our thumb on the pulse, whether it's about putting resources into the unmarked graves and ensuring that those communities are doing the work, not outside people. We're ensuring that the communities themselves are lifted in governance, in child welfare, and in every other place that I can actually honestly think about. So yeah, I think Justin Trudeau's done a great job of it, and I think he needs to continue to do his work. And I think we all need to be in there actually ensuring that we're sort of pushing him along and ensuring that our voices are a part of that conversation.
Jason, the Liberals think they've got a good story to tell as it relates to Indigenous issues. What's the good story the NDP thinks it has to tell on this?
Well, I'm an Indigenous leader, and I've worked with the current government, and I would, beg to differ a bit, but that's not the time for it, I don't think, right now. The focus of the NDP, I know you mentioned earlier on that we were the only party to speak about genocide, and I know we have a good understanding of that. But you also mentioned that we don't talk about sovereignty. But what we do talk about is enacting true nation-to-nation relationships. And the approach from the NDP is not the paternalistic top-down approach that Indigenous people are so accustomed to. I know the system's not working. And if it was working, I wouldn't be here. I would be at home still fulfilling my duties as chief. But it's not working for us. And I know that. From the other end of it, not from the top-down approach, but from the other end of it, on the communities, we're not getting the response. And the BWAs, they have been lifted and then reinstated, days later. That's a struggle. I worked across the country training Indigenous people to run water and wastewater facilities. This isn't a turnkey solution, and it takes real investment. And we have to stop fighting ourselves. We have to stop fighting Indigenous children, stop spending money fighting our people. And I'm very happy to see these two lovely Indigenous ladies running. And I hope that they don't suffer the same consequences as Jody Wilson-Raybould or Mumalak. That would be terrible, terrible thing to see. We have to make sure that we have an inclusive country and an inclusive government. That's what the NDP brings, is inclusivity. Thank you.
Well, Cynthia, since Jason just brought it up, and if he didn't, I was going to, I can't not ask you about the fact that the first ever Indigenous Minister of Justice in Canadian history, Jody Wilson-Raybould, just has a book out right now, which, dropped a bit of a bomb on this election campaign, certainly in the Liberal camp, essentially calling Justin Trudeau a phony and a liar. How comfortable are you running for the Liberals under these circumstances?
I'm perfectly comfortable working with the Liberals under these circumstances. I have actually had the privilege and the pleasure of working with many of the inside people for about the last decade. I've worked alongside Carolyn Bennett. I've actually worked alongside Minister Wilson as well when we were doing the missing and murdered Indigenous women's pre-inquiry process. I've worked with Patty Haidu. I think that the people that are in these positions are doing the very level best that they possibly can, and that would be my intention as well. And I'm not going out to throw stones at anybody. I think Jody has her own opinion on what happened and her own story that she can tell. It is not my place to actually interject anything into that story. I mean, she feels what she feels and she experienced what she experienced. But it is not stopping us from actually moving forward. And we're going to continue moving forward whether the book does well or not. And I'm sure she will as well. So I always wish her the best. She's a lovely lady. And I think that we can't just say, okay, this one person has had a negative experience. And I know that the Inuit lady also had a very negative experience. I've had negative experiences. I am an Indigenous woman. I know how difficult it can be. I work in an industry. I work in education, higher education. I know that it can be challenging, but that doesn't mean that we have to drop everything and give up. I've been working hard with people from every walk of life for the last 40 years. I'm not going to stop now.
All right, Lorraine, let me put that to you. Is the Jody Wilson-Raybould story a cautionary tale of what can happen when Indigenous people try to engage in I'll use the expression that I often hear Indigenous people use, in the Canadian parliamentary colonial settler style system?
Right. So I don't think that the Liberal Party has ever appealed to me. And I did think that the principles and values of the Green Party resonated with me because they're very close to the 7 grandfather teachings that talk about respect for diversity, wisdom, courage, bravery, honesty. These are foundational principles of the Green Party. And within the rejuvenation of the party in the last year, there's been a commitment to look at equity and diversity in the party and make space and provide support for candidates and they say equity-seeking groups, but diverse candidates, lending support to them in campaign and in their engagement in the party. In November, the Greens are going to be voting on a motion to make 3 seats on federal council available for a First Nation, an Inuit, and a Métis person, recognizing that there's got to be space for Indigenous participation in governance of the party. That's going to help us work towards, achieving equity and respecting diversity.
With just a couple of minutes left here, let me see if I can get one more question in under the wire. And Jason, I'll start with you. There were people in Quebec many years ago who, in their wisdom, decided that they weren't adequately represented on Parliament Hill, and so they set up their own party, the Bloc Québécois. It represents Quebec interests as they see them in this country. They're obviously nationalists / sovereigntists / separatists, but they have that representation. Why has, let's just call it the Indigenous People's Party of Canada, never been created, in your view?
It was.
It never really took hold, but it was attempted. So I think, number one, everything has its time and place. And there was attempts to, work at nation-to-nation relationships, and we haven't gotten there. So I think where it leaves us is, the 77 of us that see that this is the time now to enter the system as it stands and try and make those positive changes to move towards a place where Indigenous people need it to be. I would love to have an Indigenous Peoples Party of Canada. I just don't see that as the time right now. I don't think Canada is quite ready for that. I think we're ready for change and to embrace Indigenous candidates. but I don't know that we would be able to elect a member in the ridings that we have now. We have to be more inclusive. And we didn't get into this problem by ourselves, and we won't get out by ourselves. We have to work together.
Cynthia, last word to you. I note you said that it was attempted, but it really did not take off.
Yeah, no, exactly. They did make an attempt at it, and it's really challenging. You remember that this country has done a huge amount of damage to the Indigenous population. We still are grappling with what we call the legacy effect, whether it was about contact and the epidemics, or whether it was about the Indian residential school institutions, or whether it was about Indian hospitals, which also contributed, I might add, to vaccine resistance in our communities. We're not there yet either. We have a lot of work to do. I think we're doing a great job. We have some amazing young people coming up and amazing leadership, and you have one of those guys on right here on the TV right now. I think we have a ways to go, but I think we're getting educated in two ways. We have, we're Western and traditional. Our ceremonies are being everything is being reconstituted. Our languages, our cultures. I think we got a little ways to go, but we are going to be standing very strong very shortly, and maybe it will work then. Or maybe we'll create designated seats, or we don't know. But one of the things I can tell you for absolute certainty is that we are having a profound influence on this country. We always have had. The foundations are Indigenous. They're going to stay that way. And we're looking at restorative justice, and we're looking at new forms of governance systems. We're going to be there making it happen.
We are happy to remind our viewers and listeners that Lorraine Reckmans is seeking your vote as the Green Party candidate in Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes. Jason Henry in Lambton, Kent, Middlesex for the NDP, and Cynthia Wesley Eskimo for the Liberals in Simcoe North. Thanks to you three for joining us on TVO tonight. Stay safe out there on the campaign trail, and good luck to you all.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, Steve.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.